The floating mountain cracked in half, raining ancient temple stones into the clouds below, as a half-dressed monk calmly sipped tea on a levitating rock slab. The 6 executioners, armored in obsidian plating and bristling with alien weapons, hovered around him mid-air, unsure whether to shoot, scan, or apologize. One of them, a brutish enforcer named Karg, leaned in and barked, "You are harboring an illegal consciousness in violation of Empire Code 99. Surrender it." The monk, eyes half closed, tilted his head and replied, "I believe the only thing I am harboring is a second cup of jasmine." A silence stretched. Then, without warning, Karg lunged. 3 seconds later, his helmet clanged to the ground, still sealed, his body no longer inside it. Kano Rensu did not blink. He remained seated, cup raised. The other executioners drew their plasma blades, instincts honed by galactic war and bloodshed, but none of them moved. They had not seen the monk stand. They had not seen him strike. Yet one of their own was gone, reduced to mist. Something was wrong. This was not in the mission profile. A low, pulsing alarm began in the background as a scan result bleeped through the leader's visor. Bioform identified. Class forbidden. Status terminated in history. Their system refused to explain what terminated in history meant. It only repeated one phrase: Shadow Protocol, Ninja. 2 hours earlier, the skies above Earth had cracked open with thunder not made by weather. A sleek, matte black ship shaped like a spear descended from orbit, cutting through clouds with its engines humming in frequencies too high for humans to hear. Inside, the executioners stood silently in their war pods, cradled like bullets in a revolver chamber. They had been deployed to kill many things. But this time, the mission briefing had been odd: unregistered life form, high spiritual resonance, no tech signature. Orders were simple: extract or eradicate. High risk. Low logic. The captain, Vrais, didn't like missions with prophecy in them. Those were the kind that came back and stabbed you in dreams. The ship landed near a cliffside where no cliff should exist. There they saw it, a temple made of stone and sky, perched impossibly on a levitating slab of mountain, floating hundreds of feet above the forest. The only way up was via ancient vines and shimmering steps of light. Their AI systems glitched the moment they scanned it. One executioner claimed to see his dead brother in the clouds. Another reported his limbs feeling out of sync. The rookie, Yurik, vomited in his helmet and refused to take it off. Vrais sighed. This place wasn't a place. It was a warning dressed like architecture. When they entered the temple, everything was wrong. Gravity pulsed in strange waves. Candles burned without flames. Statues watched them move. At the center of it all sat an old man in gray robes, eyes closed, humming a song that made one executioner cry. Not out of pain, out of remembrance. They surrounded him, weapons drawn. He looked up and smiled as though he'd been expecting guests. The executioners introduced themselves by destroying a statue with a warning shot. Kano simply said, "You should not have broken that. She liked that one." Then he stood up. The next few minutes were difficult to explain in any formal report. Karg attacked and vanished. Another tried to record with a drone, it imploded. The AI tried to lock onto Kano, its eyes shut down instead. And all the while, the monk kept saying strange things. "It is rude to interrupt he said while flipping over a 10-foot armored brute using only 2 fingers. "That vase is not a weapon, but it has very strong opinions," he muttered just before throwing said vase like a missile through a steel beam. Eventually, they gave up trying to subdue him with force. They used gravity harnesses and seized him manually, yanking him into the air with full magnetic clamps. Kano offered no resistance. As they flew him down to the ship waiting in the forest, he looked genuinely at peace. Birds flew alongside him. One of the executioners noticed they weren't flapping their wings. They were gliding, unnaturally still, as though afraid to disturb the air. Vrais kept scanning his prisoner. Nothing made sense. No cybernetics. No enhanced organs. No implants. Just a man with a slow heart and impossible calm. But the deeper he scanned, the more errors the system gave. Then came the final scan, Shadow Protocol, Ninja. Vrais' hand trembled. That word. It was not supposed to exist. The ancient files had mentioned it in War Relics, back when Earth still fought with spirit instead of steel. Back in the transport, the monk sat chained. You do not know what I am, he said softly, not boastful, just tired. But you've seen the whisper now. That was your mistake. Yurik, the rookie asked. Are you a sorcerer? The monk looked at him kindly. No. But I've known one. He lives inside my elbow now. We share opinions. The executioners didn't know if this was a threat or a symptom. Either way, they gagged him and sedated him 3 times. It didn't work. His heartbeat never changed. Not once. As they departed Earth's atmosphere, Vrais sent a pulse back to the Empire. Target secured. Unconfirmed anomaly. The message never reached its destination. Halfway through orbit, the ship's lights flickered and dimmed. One executioner fell out of his armor, only to realize his armor was still standing. A whisper moved through the ventilation shafts. It said one word over and over again, remember. The last thing the rookie saw before losing consciousness was the monk unshackled, arms folded, floating in the air with a cup of tea that had somehow stayed full. He had never once drawn a blade. But 5 executioners were missing. And the ship had turned around without being told. Back toward Earth. Back toward the temple that no longer existed. Back toward the legend they thought they could contain. The ship glided through low orbit like a wounded beast, its engines humming with a disharmony that unsettled even the AI. Inside, silence stretched like thick fog between the few executioners who remained conscious. Kano Rensu sat cross-legged in his holding cell, chains undone, not by force, but because the ship had released them. Systems failed without warning. The gravity field shifted intermittently, like the ship was breathing. Lights dimmed and flared with no rhythm. All of it pulsed to the rhythm of his presence. He wasn't doing anything, at least not visibly. That was what made it worse. He simply existed, and the ship responded as though the universe had to make room for him. Commander Vrais stood outside the containment chamber, staring through a reinforced viewing window. On the monitor, Kano's vitals were stable. Too stable. A man should not have a resting heart rate that low after disabling 5 executioners and tearing reality like paper. Vrais had seen soldiers enhanced with cybernetics, mutants whose blood could boil steel, and artificial gods born in a lab. But this was different. It was like looking at a myth and being told it had a birth certificate. One of the medtechs whispered that the prisoner had no adrenal response, no fear reflex, no sleep cycles. Another whispered he had dreamed of Kano the night before they even received the mission order. None of them dared speak loud around him anymore. As if he might respond to sound like a shark responds to blood. Kano, for his part, appeared unconcerned. He was watching the wall like it held a secret he'd been waiting a decade to hear. Occasionally, he would nod slowly or smile, like a man listening to an old song he hadn't heard since childhood. When food was delivered, it was untouched. When asked questions, he said nothing. Until, suddenly, without warning, he spoke. His voice didn't match the stillness. It echoed in the chamber like it had arrived from somewhere else entirely. There was a time, he said, when shadows were worshipped. Not out of fear, but respect. We did not strike first. We struck last. When the world had already broken. Vrais stepped forward, arms behind his back, mechanical limbs clicking softly. You were one of the Earthborn programs. Weren't you? Before the fall. Pre-invasion. A war ghost they buried in a monastery. Kano did not move. The Earthborn programs were failures. Too much science. Not enough silence. But there were others. One success. One path. That path was walked in bare feet. Vrais frowned. The metaphor was irritating. Then you're saying you were the first ninja? Kano blinked. No. I am the last. There was something final about the way he said it. Like punctuation carved into stone. Vrais turned away, annoyed with how the conversation left him more confused than before. But he couldn't shake the image. A child bred in war, raised in meditation, trained to kill without technology. The perfect counter to an empire dependent on machines. And somehow, he had survived the culling. As the ship continued toward the Empire's orbital base, strange things began happening in the systems. The AI refused to process visual footage from Kano's cell. Attempts to monitor him in real time produced corrupted files. Doors misaligned. Bulkheads opened for no reason. The ship's logs began rewriting themselves. In one report, Kano had been executed hours ago. In another, he had never been captured. Yurik, the rookie, went missing after claiming he saw a second Kano walking upside down across the ceiling. Everyone assumed he was hallucinating. Until they found his armor neatly folded in a drawer, with a small cup of jasmine tea placed on top of it. In the brig, Kano closed his eyes and remembered the last time he had spoken with a god. It was years ago, in the ruins of Tokyo, when the sky had turned red and the rivers flowed backward for a day. A great entity had fallen from orbit, shattering the ground in a whisper that no man could hear. The monks called it the Silent One. Kano had approached the crater. The creature had no face, only an endless surface that mirrored his thoughts. It asked him nothing. But it left him with knowledge. Knowledge that unlocked the final gate in his training. That was the day he stopped aging. That was the day he became the weapon Earth would never live to use. A low vibration hummed through the ship as a fail-safe door locked unprompted. Vrais shouted commands, but the AI no longer responded. In the central chamber, the ship's reactor began to pulse like a heart. The executioners gathered in panic. Their weapons malfunctioned, switching modes without input. One by one, their HUDs glitched until a single phrase scrawled across every screen in dead language glyphs. It translated, roughly, to "The Shadow remembers." Suddenly, the ship changed course. Without command, it began descending again, back toward Earth's surface. Panic rippled through the crew. Vrais stormed into the brig, demanded to know what was happening. Kano looked up, not with a smile, but with something deeper. Pity. "This ship was never yours," he said softly. "It was built with Earth's hands. You forgot that. But the stone remembers. So does the fire beneath it." And then the lights cut out. The walls folded inward. Not physically, but perceptually. Reality bent in such a way that space seemed to loop, trapping the executioners in repeating corridors. Time skipped. One crew member aged to dust in seconds. Another reverted to childhood and screamed until he vanished. Kano stood in the center of it all, untouched. But he was not alone. From the shadows, other figures began to appear. Not real. Not yet. Projections. Echoes of others like him. Not from his time, but from memory. Spectral warriors, eyes glowing, blades hissing through non-space. He had awakened them. Not as allies, but as reminders of what once was. Kano moved through the disintegrating ship with grace, stepping over confusion, through fear, into clarity. Vrais confronted him at the hangar bay. Plasma blade drawn, eyes wild. "You don't get to take this ship. You don't get to rewrite the war." Kano bowed, once. "The war was never yours to begin with." They fought for less than a minute. Vrais struck with rage, power, speed. He was faster than any human. But Kano didn't block. He wasn't there to win. He was there to erase. Each movement left no wound, only absence. When Vrais finally collapsed, he wasn't dead. He simply ceased being part of the moment. Like history had forgotten him. Kano turned to the ship's interface and whispered the true name of the Earthborn craft. Something only he knew. The ship sighed. And obeyed. As it descended back toward Earth, cloaked once more in mist and silence, the temple began to reassemble in the clouds. The rock slabs floated back into place. The world forgot again. But Kano remembered. And somewhere far beyond the stars, another ship received a whisper. A single line of impossible code. It said, "One ninja breached the veil. More may follow." Prepare the counter-shadow. General Vrais did not bleed. He had not bled in years, not since the Empire had stripped away the last of his human biology and replaced it with armor forged from asteroid cores and memory metal. But something inside him twisted as the transmission came through. Static, encrypted, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. The word burned across his HUD in red: ninja. His hands tightened into fists, hydraulic servos groaning under the pressure. He hadn't heard that word since the fall of Earth's resistance. It wasn't supposed to come back. It wasn't supposed to survive. In the command chamber of the Executioner flagship, Vrais loomed like a monument of war. Other commanders stood around him, their forms obscured by blackened armor and energy cloaks, but none dared speak first. Vrais was not a general who shared his thoughts. When he moved, the Empire moved. When he went silent, entire planets waited for a breath that never came. But now, something had stirred him. Something old. Something forgotten on purpose. He activated the Deep Archive, forcing the AI to pull up redacted Earth war files. Most were corrupted, intentionally erased during the planetary acquisition, but one survived, a fragment of a visual record. A battlefield. Smoke. Screaming. And a single frame of footage where a blur moved between enemy lines like a ghost, faster than weapon tracking systems could lock. No armor. No enhancements. Just cloth, wind, and impossible precision. The ninja. They had never identified the operative. No facial ID. No digital trail. Just rumors. Soldiers who survived called it the walking absence. Vrais had assumed it died with the others. Now he wasn't so sure. He traced the transmission to an abandoned vessel, the Executioner Prison Transport 47 Gamma, supposedly lost in an atmospheric malfunction. But the logs showed the ship re-entered Earth's orbit, changed course mid-air, and then disappeared completely. No crash site. No signal. Like it had slipped into a layer of reality that Empire scanners couldn't touch. Vrais didn't believe in mysticism. He believed in threats. And this one had a name now. Kano Rensu. The same name that appeared in the Empire's spiritual anomaly list, flagged decades ago by the Oracle AI. Vrais stared at it in silence, then turned and issued a single order. Assemble the core executioners. We descend now. The flagship tore across the void, an obsidian dagger of fury, cutting a silent path back to the place Vrais had sworn never to return. Earth. On the surface, in a forgotten valley surrounded by sky-choked trees and cliffs that moved when unobserved, Kano walked alone. He had left the ruins of the temple behind, rebuilt in sky and mist for future seekers. Now he wandered the Earth's underbelly, seeking the last fragments of the old ways. Not temples. Not monks. But memories. Buried places where spirit and history had not yet been overwritten by concrete and code. He found one in a collapsed bunker beneath the old Eurasian front, a vault older than the war, older even than recorded civilization. Here, buried beneath roots and time, lay something he had once feared to retrieve. The Whisper Blade. Forged in the Time Forge, a mythical weapon said to be cast not in metal, but in motion. It did not cut the body, it cut presence. Those struck were not killed. They were removed from memory, from cause, from the thread of now. Only a ninja trained in full silent flow could wield it. And only one remained. Kano reached into the stone box and pulled it free. It was light. Too light. As if holding it made gravity politely step aside. He stared at its dark surface. There were no runes. No hilt. Just shadow shaped like a blade. It vibrated with hunger, but not for blood. For erasure. For silence. He knew using it came with cost. Not just to others. To himself. Each time he swung it, part of him would blur. Become a whisper, not a man. But the time for stillness was over. He rose as the earth trembled. They were coming. Above, the clouds tore open. The flagship descended not with stealth, but with declaration. Vrais didn't believe in subtlety. Columns of flame dropped from its underbelly, carrying executioners in formation, their silhouettes framed by crackling storm. They landed in the clearing like gods returned from exile. Each was a different shape, some enormous, others sleek, one with no legs, only floating limbs and eyes like stars. They formed a circle around their leader as Vrais stepped forward. His body was a cathedral of weapons. Jet black plating fused with glowing veins of molten memory crystal. His voice, when he spoke, was not one voice but many, layered and deep, like several versions of him speaking at once from different futures. "Kano Ransu," he said. "You should have stayed buried. I came here once to kill the last of your kind. I failed. I won't again." Kano looked at the general with no fear, only recognition. There was something beneath the armor. Something familiar. A memory clawed its way through his mind, of a boy in a monastery, laughing, training, vanishing into war. He whispered a name under his breath, too low for anyone but the wind to hear. "Varen." Vrais paused for the briefest flicker. A glitch in his stance. A fragment of an old life kicking from inside a forgotten shell. Then it was gone. "I am not that name," he said. "That boy died when Earth surrendered." Kano took a step forward. The air stilled. Leaves stopped moving. Even the birds went silent. "Then let me bury what remains." And then, without sound or ceremony, the battle began. The executioners moved first, synchronized in perfect, brutal choreography. Energy blades, pulse cannons, gravity nets, all unleashed in a deadly ballet designed to crush any mortal resistance. But Kano wasn't mortal in the way they understood. He moved like light that had forgotten how to stop. He did not block. He was simply never where the attacks landed. One by one, he dismantled their formations, not with strength, but precision. He touched pressure points on armor that shut systems down. He flicked stones that disrupted sensor grids. And then he unsheathed the whisper blade. The moment it left its scabbard, reality warped. Vrais staggered back as three of his commanders simply vanished. No explosion. No scream. Just gone. Like they had never existed. The Empire would find no trace of them. Not even memory. One of the remaining executioners, panicked, turned his own weapon on himself to escape. Another dropped to his knees, whispering a prayer in a language he didn't know he remembered. Kano stood at the center, breathing slowly. The blade hummed beside him like a living wound. Vrais roared and charged, weapons igniting in a blaze of unrelenting fire. Steel met silence. Rage met calm. Brother met brother. And the world held its breath. Kano stood at the edge of a shattered cliff, the remnants of the battle still echoing across the hills like the fading memory of thunder. The forest below had gone quiet again, disturbed but not destroyed. Trees that had withstood centuries of war whispered secrets through swaying leaves, and birds cautiously resumed their song as if nothing had happened. The bodies of the executioners had long since been taken by the wind, erased by the Whisperblade's cruel grace. Only General Vrais remained, not dead, but broken. Not physically. Kano hadn't needed to touch him for that. Their final exchange had done something worse. It had shaken something loose. Vrais had vanished before the collapse of the battle, retreating into the fold between dimensions using Empire tech fused with something far older. He had whispered a name before he disappeared, something that did not belong to a general. Something that belonged to a human. Kano knew what that meant. The man was not gone. He was unraveling. And unraveling men were dangerous. They forgot what they were trying to win, and started tearing things apart for the sake of hearing them scream. Kano had seen it before. He would see it again. He descended into the valleys of Vrais, where mist met stone and the sky never fully touched the ground. There, hidden beneath a waterfall that split sideways instead of down, lay the entrance to the old sanctum. The monks of Vrais were not warriors in the traditional sense. They fought with silence, with questions, with knowledge sharp enough to peel the skin off lies. When Kano arrived, no one greeted him. That was the tradition. If one deserved entry, one did not need a welcome. The temple knew. And it opened for him, folding its architecture backward into the rock until a narrow hallway appeared where once was wall. Inside, time had softened the air. Incense lingered from a fire that hadn't burned in years. The monks moved like ghosts, their feet never fully touching the floor. One of them approached, old and barely taller than the folds of his robe. He looked up at Kano, eyes cloudy, voice weathered by 1,000 silences. "You are late." Kano bowed. "The blade was hidden too well. And now it is not. So the storm returns." "The storm never left," Kano said, walking past him into the inner chambers. There, etched in the stone floor beneath a skylight shaped like an open hand, was a map. Not of land, but of energy, currents and ley lines that pulsed across Earth like veins. The Empire had been trying to pave over them for decades, replacing shrines with power stations, temples with mines, sanctuaries with concrete towers that hummed with dead frequencies. But the lines were still there, just hidden. And Kano needed them now. He knelt at the map, placed 2 fingers on an intersection glowing faintly red. "This is where it begins," a voice behind him asked. "Begins again or ends?" It belonged to someone new. Or rather, someone not old. She stepped forward with the kind of balance only warriors had. She wore the robes of a monk, but they hung loose over armor pieces scavenged from different centuries. Her face bore the marks of sun, smoke, and loss. "My name is Jin," she said. "You're him. The one who walked out of the mist." "I walk into it too," Kano replied. "Many times." She tilted her head. "Are you recruiting?" He nodded once. She smiled. Not wide. Not excited. Just the smile of someone who knew she was about to step onto a road she might never leave. "Good. I'm tired of watching and doing nothing." Over the next several days, the resistance began to coalesce. It wasn't an army. Kano didn't want soldiers. He wanted witnesses. Survivors. Those who had felt the world shift under their feet and didn't forget how it used to feel. Jin brought in a hacker who spoke in riddles and could shut down an orbital cannon using only a tuning fork. They found a reprogrammed executioner drone, nicknamed Clip, who had developed something very close to guilt after Kano severed its kill command during the prison ship incident. There was also a talking fungus named Groth, who had once infected an entire Empire supply chain before realizing it had a conscience. He now wore a hat, because intelligent spores deserve dignity. They trained in secret, moved in silence, disrupted supply lines and cracked Empire surveillance hubs by sending them nothing but poetry. The world began to notice the disturbances, but could not trace them. And all the while, Vrais watched. Somewhere beyond Earth's edge, aboard a ship hidden inside a false star, he whispered into old mirrors and pressed his hand to a relic that burned without flame. His body trembled. Not from fear. From memory. The layers of programming installed in him to bury his past were failing. The name Kano had called him, Varen, haunted him. He began to dream again. In those dreams, he wasn't a general. He was a boy, running barefoot through temple halls, laughing at shadows. But the dreams always ended the same way. With blood on the floor and a hand reaching out to him, his brother's hand, and the sound of a blade singing a song no machine could understand. When he awoke, he ordered the preparation of the counter-shadow. A project buried even deeper than the ninja. A contingency for an event that the Empire had believed impossible, the return of a force that could not be quantified. The counter-shadow was not a person. It was an idea given flesh. A thing designed to learn instantly and forget selectively. It wore no armor, spoke no language, and had no concept of time. It was a mirror polished to the point that it reflected not just form but intention. And it was being awakened for one purpose only: to destroy the ninja before the world remembered why it needed them. Back on Earth, the Resistance launched its first coordinated attack, not on a military base, but on a silence field. These were the devices the Empire used to erase spiritual resonance from key locations, cutting off ley lines and weakening natural flows. They were disguised as communication towers. Kano and his team dismantled one under cover of a dust storm, using a combination of hand signs, frequency disruptors, and distraction provided by Groth launching himself at a patrol unit while singing opera. The moment the field fell, something deeper shifted. The ground sighed. A hidden shrine reappeared near the ruins. Birds flew in from distant zones. And the map in the temple of Murai lit up like veins returning to a long-sleeping heart. Jeanne looked at Kano, breathing hard, sweat and dust on her face. That was only one tower. Kano nodded. There are 62. And Vrais? He's not the threat yet, Kano said. She blinked. Yet? Kano looked toward the sky, where a second sun had begun to flicker. Too small. Too deliberate. He's waking something worse. The false sun split in half above the earth, shedding its disguise like a discarded mask. From the hollow sphere descended a structure that wasn't built so much as birthed, a lattice of black bone and golden circuitry that pulsed like an organism too large to die. The Empire's orbital base, once hidden, now exposed, rotated into view and began its descent. It did not fall like a ship, but rather unfolded downward, reconfiguring itself into a temple of war designed not just to crush resistance, but to erase the concept of resistance altogether. At its core, held within a prism of containment fields and runes carved in languages not native to any world, was the counter-shadow. The thing did not walk. It unfolded. Limbs appeared where needed. Faces shimmered across its surface and vanished. It moved as if it remembered how light had once danced on water, and now sought to mock it. It had no weapons, because it was the weapon. It had no voice, because intention spoke louder. It was faster than sight, harder than thought, and Vrais had poured every fragment of his forgotten humanity into its awakening. He had stopped being a man long ago. But now, knowing what stirred inside him, what might be trying to return, he would burn the world before letting that memory take root. Kano was not just an enemy. He was a reminder. And reminders were dangerous. On the earth below, the resistance watched the structure descend. Some stared in awe. Others in dread. Jeanne looked to Kano, who stood unmoving, his eyes closed, as if already speaking to the thing that hadn't yet touched the ground. He was listening. Feeling. The ley lines screamed in frequencies only the trained could hear. The sky had started to reject its own stars. The balance of energy, disrupted by the silenced towers and fractured temples, now tilted further toward the synthetic. If the counter-shadow landed, there would be no coming back. Not for the Earth. Not for the idea of Earth. We need to strike now, she said. Not strike, Kano replied. Witness. The resistance did not understand at first. They had prepared for battle. Weapons. Plans. Distractions. But Kano was not preparing to fight in the way they expected. He moved quietly through the hills, to a place untouched by Empire hands, where the last stone of the original Shadow Temple still stood, half buried in moss and forgotten wind. He knelt and placed the whisper blade at the base of the stone, then traced a circle around it with his fingers, whispering in a language no longer spoken. The earth trembled. From the circle rose not soldiers, but echoes, shadows of the past, figures in robes, warriors without names. Spirits. The last clan rises when the first blade is buried, he said. The others nodded, understanding now. This was not just about stopping a threat. It was about restoring what had been lost. Not the buildings. The belief. From the ridge above, clipped the reprogrammed executioner scanned the descending structure. It's learning, it said in a voice that flickered between mechanical and almost human. It's watching us like we're an equation. It's not just reacting, it's rewriting possibilities. Groth adjusted his fungus cap nervously. If it learns too much, he said, it won't just kill us, it'll invent new reasons why we never existed. The plan was no longer simple sabotage. The resistance needed to fracture the landing pattern, draw the counter-shadow to the spiritual convergence point, the only place on Earth where energy still flowed freely through all natural lines. That meant sacrifice. That meant risk. And it meant drawing attention in the most dangerous way possible, by being remembered. Kano led them across the valley, where the air grew thin and the sky thickened like oil. As they ran, the counter-shadow moved, It didn't run. It shortened distance. With every step it took, it bent space inward, collapsing terrain into loops, disrupting gravity in bursts that caused birds to fall mid-flight and stones to hover like they had forgotten how to land. It appeared behind them more than once. Each time it watched. Once it mimicked. It copied Jin's run perfectly, down to the flicker of her breath. But when it tried to match Kano, it paused. Then stopped. Then shimmered. Because something in him refused to be copied. Vrais watched from his command spire, his body nearly merged with the control systems. His thoughts were pulses now, transmitted through living cables. He felt the counter-shadow's hesitation. He knew what it meant. The flaw was not in the code. The flaw was in the origin. Kano had never been a product. He was a choice. That made him unpredictable. And unpredictability, it infected systems like nothing else. The final confrontation came at dusk, where the last temple's foundation cracked open like an egg and revealed a chamber of glass and fire beneath it. Kano stood alone at its center, the whisper blade at his side. The counter-shadow arrived in silence, folding inward from 20 different places at once. It regarded him not as an opponent, but as a question. It moved first, not in aggression, but in mimicry, attempting to mirror his stance, his breath, even his silence. But when it did, its form began to destabilize. The mimicry was wrong. It did not carry the weight of stillness. Only the echo of it. Kano struck once. Not with violence, but with intent. The blade moved so fast, the world held its breath. It did not cut the counter-shadow. It severed its memory of being perfect. It blinked, confused. For the first time, it hesitated. And in that hesitation, the rest moved. Jin struck the crystal convergence point with a resonance spike. Clip broadcast a data virus coded in forgotten dialects. Groth released spores encoded with prayer. The counter-shadow stumbled. It screamed, not with sound, but with the unraveling of logic. Its body folded in on itself, caught in a loop of self-recognition it couldn't reconcile. It turned to Vrais, seeking guidance. But Vrais was no longer watching. He stood at the edge of his control deck, staring into the blue of Earth's sky. His mind was already breaking. Varen, the boy he once was, had won a single breath. And in that breath, he whispered, "I remember you, brother." The counter-shadow collapsed into the convergence point and vanished. The false sun dimmed. The Empire's orbit began to shatter. Resistance cells across the world felt the shift. Not a victory. A beginning. Kano returned the blade to its resting place. The spirits faded. The others stood around him, not cheering. Just breathing. The sky was open again. The wind moved like it remembered how. And from far above, in a place no one could reach yet, a quiet transmission blinked on. A voice said, "If one ninja can change the tide, imagine what happens when the others awaken. The stars are listening. Prepare."